Apologies if my voice sounds a little thick and croaky today. I'm still seeing the tail end of a nasty little cold, and I'm still a little, congested in this area. That's definitely a lot more information than most of you want to know, I'm sure. Off to a good start here, aren't I? Anyway, on to the business at hand. I've made no secret on this channel that when I was seriously looking to get into hi-fi in my late teens, there were two brands of amplifier that I really coveted but could never afford, and they were Sugden and Musical Fidelity. The first Musical Fidelity amplifier to seduce me was the A1000, with its 50 watts per channel of pure Class A power and off-board power supply. It had a big, rich, yet detailed presentation that sounded glorious with big KEF reference 1042 speakers of the time. Some years later, a good friend of mine had the F15 power amp that had a similar character, but perhaps took things to another level of performance. There was no way as a student that I could afford to get either one of those, but now that I've raised my self-imposed bar on the components that I review up to about circa 10 grand per component, I couldn't wait to get a big Musical Fidelity amplifier in for review. The M8s Pre and the M8s 500s power amp, that is a ridiculous name, I know. Anyway, that power amp that you see behind me, that sucker can deliver 500 watts per channel into 8 ohms. That's over 1,000 watts in total. So it's not only big in stature, in fact too big to fit on my rack, it's big power that we're talking about here as well. Up until the very recent relaunch of the new Vista range, they were Musical Fidelity's top tier of amplifiers. This one threw up some surprises. The M8s Pre is a fully balanced preamp, 440 by 162 by 400 millimeters, that's 17.3 by 6.4 by 15.7 inches. It weighs 17 kilograms or 35.5 pounds. Also available in a silver finish for £3,499 in the United Kingdom. Build is solid but deliberately nothing elaborate to keep the costs down. Next to the button to take it out of standby is one for the tape monitor loop. Phono. The M8s Pre has both moving magnet and moving coil phono stages fitted inside, and then a further 7 inputs, 2 of which are balanced XLR. The visuals are dominated by a neat little LED display and rotary volume knob. It has a robust click to it as you make adjustments in half dB steps, so get used to large movements to alter the volume for low-level listening. The plastic remote control is a decent size, but certainly nothing to get excited about for a preamplifier at this price. The rear gives you a better sense of what you're paying for, with a bank of RCA inputs and a tape monitoring output for recording devices. There's a toggle switch to select between the moving magnet and moving coil phono stages. Another one is to convert the auxiliary 2 input to fixed home theatre bypass, allowing an AV receiver to control the volume. Of the 2 balanced XLR inputs, one can also be switched for home theatre use. Analog outputs are available on single-ended RCA and balanced XLR. The matching M8s 500s power amp has also a fully balanced architecture. It's the same width and height as the preamp, but deeper at 460 millimeters or 18.1 inches. Quite the beast at 29 kilograms or 63.9 pounds. It retails over here for £3,999. There's just the standby button on the front. Like the preamp, the build is functional but nothing excessive such as fancy heat sinks or front plate extrusions that would push the price up. On the business end, the 2 sets of speaker binding posts will make bi-wiring a breeze. There are RCA and XLR inputs and a set of loop outputs to connect to a second amplifier for bi-amping. Let's take a look inside the preamplifier. And what you'll immediately see is a dual mono construction, which is nice for a preamplifier of this price. There's a transformer for the left channel and a transformer for the right channel. And they're by Norwegian company Noratel. Can't quite make out the branding from this angle, but that's a well-respected manufacturer of transformers. There'll be many power amplifiers that'll be quite happy with transformers of this size. And it's also a nice touch that Musical Fidelity have gone to the trouble of encasing them in metal pots, because they radiate even less noise to the sensitive preamplifier parts where you're dealing with low-level signals. That's the main power supply board, and what you'll see is lots of blue rectangles which are metallized film capacitors. Again, a nice touch that they haven't gone for electrolytic capacitors, which you typically tend to find. Electrolytic capacitors tend to dry out over time and their values shift. These should stay stable for life, and also they have lower ESR. You want a capacitor to have capacitance rather than resistance. ESR stands for equivalent series resistance. And here on the left hand side you have some input and outputs, and just sticking proud of that is the main preamplifier board. It's a fully balanced configuration, so you have twice the amount of components that you'll typically find, because there's two signals, positive and negative, as opposed to a single-ended where you only have one signal going through. And that's so that they can do something called common mode rejection. They can compare the two signals, identify what the noise is, and remove it. There is another input switching board behind that, which you can't quite see, and I think if I go any closer, my camera will go out of focus. It's quite a bit of empty space. I'm sure they could have made it a bit smaller, but I should imagine they wanted to keep it similar size to the power amplifier. And also there can be a sonic benefit from spreading things out so that things aren't on top of each other so much. Onto the power amplifier, and again it's a dual mono construction with two transformers from Nortel, but much heavier, which is what's needed for a power amplifier. That green board in between them is to do with switching the input from 230 to 115 volts for different regions. The main power supply is behind them with 8 of those capacitors. They're from Jamicon. I'd have preferred a top Japanese manufacturer like Nishikon or Rubicon rather than this Taiwanese manufacturer, but with everything else going on inside this amplifier, I suppose they had to make a compromise. So they elected for a mid-tier cap manufacturer rather than a top tier one. Each one's rated at 6,800 microfarads, so that's 27,200 microfarads per channel, which, you know, is okay, but I've seen more. And over here, there's an identical one on the other side, is the power amplifier board. Again, fully balanced architecture and discrete as well, as I can see. I can't see any of those tiny surface mount components, which is nice because discrete components can handle power better. Let me show you the output devices. Hopefully you can see them there, mounted onto that pink card. And you can make them out. They're STD03, I think. Actually, that says N on that side. So that's the NPN one. There's 6 of them there. And the P devices, this is a push-pull Class AB amplifier. You have NPN and PNP devices, which I won't get into now. And so there's another 6 there. So 12 output devices. I think, as far as I'm aware, these run as Darlington pairs, which basically means the emitter, the output from one transistor, feeds into the base of the one next to it. And by combining them that way, you get more current. So they kind of daisy chain together in pairs. And you've got obviously 3 pairs there, 3 pairs here. And over the other side, it's exactly the same. Yeah, lots crammed in there. I had to adjust my expectations pretty early on during listening tests. It was clear that this M8 combo wasn't going to give me that big, rich sonic character of some of their Class A offerings from the past. It's Class AB for starters. Now, that isn't necessarily a bad thing. I just had to deal with my disappointment that I wasn't going to get those cozy, nostalgic feelings. That said though, the M8s Pre and the M8s Power are a mighty fine combination when judged in their own right. For starters, the bass control is phenomenal. If I'm nitpicking, and it's my job to nitpick, there's a touch of dryness to the presentation. I'd like a little bit more bass weight and a slightly thicker lower mid-range. I don't know about you, but I want a 500 watt amplifier to give me the kind of dynamic thrills and spills that you simply don't get from a 100 watt amplifier. It's as if these amplifiers have been tuned to show a little bit of restraint, and I'd prefer a little bit more free-spiritedness. Other than that, the M8s Pre and M8s 500s are remarkably free from coloration. The vocal clarity is top-notch, as is their ability to track performers within a mix. In this regard, it's a major step up from something like a Hegel H190, even though it doesn't offer much more in terms of soundstage width and depth. But that is a particular strength of the Hegel for its price. The extra clarity, grip, control, more precise imaging, and ability to play louder make it all a worthwhile upgrade over the H190. It also produces high frequencies beautifully. These big musical fidelities don't quite have the same level of transparency as the Moor Angel Pre and Angel 4 I recently reviewed, which I think tonally are as close to perfection as I've so far encountered, and unearth a little bit more micro detail. But the M8 combo is more dynamic, can achieve higher SPL levels and drive more demanding speakers, which I talk about later. My Exposure 21 Pre and 18 Super monoblocks can't quite match the M8s for transient snap and fall a fair bit behind in bass control. Tonally, the exposures are more coloured, but they have a richness to their sound that make many a Class A amplifier blush. The musical fidelities have a beautiful decay at the end of notes, but here again I'm going to give the nod to my vintage Pre monoblocks, just for the natural way in which things fall off. And I'm pinching myself as I'm saying this, but it's true, I've still yet to encounter a solid state amplifier that can soundstage in terms of width, but particularly in depth, as well as my Exposure 21 Pre and 18 Super monoblocks. These are pretty big units, so even if you can accommodate the 162mm, that's 6.5 inch height, you still have to check that your rack or whatever you're placing them on can accommodate the depth of the power amplifier in particular, which is 460mm. That's over 18.1 inches from front to back, not allowing for cables. I don't think any particular attention needs to be given to placement other than that, because they run pretty cool, so ventilation won't be a concern. I would use balanced XLR cables between the preamplifier and the power amplifier to take advantage of the fully balanced architecture inside. If you use single-ended RCA, you simply won't be doing that. And the only other thing I think I should point out is that I got them here specifically at the same time as the ATC SCM40s, because by ATC's own admission, those speakers require a little bit of driving. I wasn't disappointed. In fact, overall I'd say that the M8s Pre and M8s 500 was my favourite amplifier pairing with the big ATCs. They controlled those taxing woofers extremely well, had the clarity to allow that famous 3-inch mid-range to shine, and enough refinement on top. I don't think for a minute that many people will be buying a 500 watt per channel amplifier to run with compact stand mount speakers, but some of them can be really tricky to drive, and my Proax are one of those speakers. It's a good combination with the music fidelities, lovely mid-range, sweet top end, but here's where I miss my exposures the most, for the bass weight and soundstage depth. Now it's perfectly reasonable to suggest that my old amps add a little bit in the bass, which flatters smaller stand mount speakers, whereas the M8 combo is tuned sensibly to work with floor standing speakers that are naturally going to have a little bit more extension and energy in low frequencies. That's fair enough. The Graham Audio LS6F speakers are a compact floor stander that share many sonic characteristics with my Proax, superbly natural mid-range with more bass extension but a little darker on top. In terms of power, a bit of overkill for that speaker, but yet again a good combination. The lack of coloration and the ability to drive like Lewis Hamilton means that the M8 Pre Power is going to work well with a wide variety of speakers. Music fidelity are onto a winning formula with the M8s Pre and the M8s 500s. Its no-nonsense exterior belies a very capable amplifier under the skin, with I'm sure the clarity, grip and control to challenge many a more expensive amplifier in fancier clothing. Those of you with a £3,000 integrated looking to step up will be very happy with the extra performance that the M8 combo brings, but I think its natural domain lies with lower sensitivity speakers in large rooms, where its combination of grace and power means that it continues to deliver where many other amplifiers are just simply running out of headroom. My main criticism is that I'd like a little bit more muscularity to the presentation, a little bit more of the Ford Mustang and less of the Porsche 911 DNA to creep in. That said though, the M8s Pre and the M8s 500s are accomplished amplifiers, and they get a highly recommended from this channel. I think it's fairly true to say that the vast majority of us only need an amplifier with a few watts to match our rooms, our loudspeakers, and the listening levels that the vast majority of us tend to listen at. But it's also been my experience that big power amplifiers bring something to the party in terms of dynamics and control, especially at low frequencies, for reasons I won't get into now. Power supply, current capability. Oh dear, it's definitely time for me to wrap things up. Anyway, please share in the comments section your experiences of matching speakers with amplifiers, the good and the bad. I'd love to hear about that. All that remains for me to say is if you like this video, if you like what I'm doing with this channel, you want to see it grow and you haven't done so already, please do all that social media stuff. Check me out on Patreon for consultancy services and bonus content. Join the ABA Club on Patreon where we have periodic video calls. But for today, for now, British Audiophile signing off.